Good morning, John. 1973. Pinochet's soldiers stormed the University of Chile, professors arrested, student groups dismantled. 1933. Hitler purged German universities, replacing hundreds of scholars with party loyalists. 1980. Iran's Cultural Revolution shut down campuses for years to cleanse them of dissent. 2017. Hungary's government forced Central European University to leave the country. President Trump's attacks on universities have been, to my eye, not as intense as those or as intense as they could be, but also reflect this broader pattern. There is, I think, undeniably a series of policies meant to scare and control universities. We've got situations where funding is threatened if universities don't align themselves with President Trump's ideology. Funding for research grants has been withheld in many cases, which isn't just bad for universities, it's bad because that research isn't getting done. UCLA has been asked to pay $1 billion to the government, at which point they will start to allow them to receive research grants again. But then there are also broad tactics that are being used to soften the income of universities so that they don't have as many resources. For example, if you make it harder for international students to get student visas, then there will be fewer international students, and that is an important part of school budgets because those students tend to pay full price. I've been thinking about why this is such a common thing for leaders who have a tremendous amount of power to do. But first, I want to talk about the most boring but probably important way that this is going on in America right now. So when a school gets a grant from the government to do research, the bulk of that goes to the research, the equipment, the staff, etc. But then in addition to that, there are indirect costs. There's the building, the electricity, the IT, the HR. There's all these parts of having a research program that you also have to pay for. These are the indirect costs, and they're generally paid for by a flat percent on top of the grant. So if the grant is for $100,000 and the overhead rate is 50%, which is a high rate, but some schools have higher overhead, then the grant will pay out $150,000. So the research costs $100,000, and then you apply this overhead cost on top of it. These overhead rates are usually somewhere between 30 and 60%. The Trump administration is trying to cap that at 15%, completely without reason. There isn't a reason why they thought that was the right number. Also, and I know, but when they're talking about this, they seem to believe that a 50% overhead rate mean that half of the money was going to overhead, which is an understandable mistake to make, although I just showed you why it's not the case in the example above. But I could totally see myself making that mistake, but not a person who, I don't know, is in charge of this. You should know that if you're in charge of it. Anyway, point is, you could see how this would be a big deal for schools that rely on these grants to do research and to keep their facilities running. And how that might terrify them and make them very wary about upsetting the Trump administration, which might have a cooling effect on their ability to be independent of the whims of the federal government. I mean, not even really the federal government, the whims of a single man. But as I say, I want to think about this. And I've been thinking a lot particularly about whether there is an authoritarian playbook. They took that right out of the authoritarian playbook. Or if instead all authoritarians are existing in the same world and have similar instincts and incentives, and so they just do similar stuff. And of course, it's got to be a little bit of both. They could certainly learn from each other, but also the moves that they find instinctively appealing are going to be the ones that they hear about that also resonate with them. And there are reasons why these things resonate with them. There's reasons why going after universities resonates with authoritarians, with powerful narcissists. And I think, though, correct me if I'm wrong, pretty tight overlap between authoritarian and powerful narcissist. But if it's a little bit of both, which it probably is, maybe it's not that important whether it's a playbook or whether it's just common instinct. But it's definitely true that going after universities is a thing that authoritarians do. So why? Why does this happen over and over and over again? Well, first, I'm going to tell you the common from outside perspective. This, when you look at this happening in Hungary or in Chile, you're oh, I get why this is happening. And then I'm going to tell you the interior, if it's happening in my own country, I have a slightly different perspective on it. So the common explanation people give for this is universities are a big area of society where free inquiry is structurally protected. And this is true. And I think this is something that authoritarians don't like. So tenure, peer review, academic freedom are all guardrails against direct political control. Authoritarians want to have authority. And so for them, that's dangerous. If your power depends on controlling the story about what's true and not true, you can't have thousands of well-respected, high-status people running around testing ideas, publishing inconvenient facts. There's also the fact that universities concentrate young people and also give them the time to think and form their political identities. And young people are usually more open to social change, and they are not yet as invested in the status quo. So that's a volatile population, and you can try to recruit them into your movement. That's a thing you can do, or you could just disrupt the places that teach them how to think critically about you. But I honestly think those two things might more be nice side effects for authoritarians. The bigger, like, more reliable reason to go after universities is just like the core of how authoritarianism happens, which is that the authoritarian is working together with a group of people who are the true citizens to decide who the true citizens are. Who do we find as in the in-group, and who do we define as in the out-group? And universities and the people in them are almost tailor-made to fall into the out-group. Some reasons why. They've got cushy jobs. At least they look cushy from the outside. Sometimes those jobs are guaranteed for life, and they often pay more than the average person in their community. Second thing, their work is extremely specialized, extremely jargon-heavy. It's going to be pretty impenetrable to the average person and might feel totally separate from reality. Like, why are you thinking about all of that stuff? How does that impact a normal person's life? Will it ever? They are often, and in the case of the US, increasingly politically homogenous in ways that don't match the country as a whole. The institutions that they are a part of often have lots of money. Now, don't always, but the ones that we focus on the most do. And a lot of that money comes from the government. And why it comes from the government can sort of be glossed over, because the biggest reason is that these places are just really good at doing research well, and this is a good place to do research inside of, rather than like a private company that might be trying to create something that they're going to capitalize on and make a bunch of money off of. And they also tend to be fairly international. Like, they bring people from all over the world, and that is a huge source of strength in education and in research, but it also makes it easier to put this into the out-group bucket, because this is an international group. It is not an American group. And then maybe the most important thing here is that universities generate ideas and share ideas that are challenging to the self-image of the in-group. They call it woke, baby! That's what woke is. If you point out facts about the structure of society, about injustice, about power, about identity, about history that don't match with the conception of the in-group's identity, especially if someone is already primed to distrust these people, it will look like they are attacking, like, not just the person, but like the very core of what it means to be American. Put all of that together, you have a group that is visibly privileged, culturally distinct, and ideologically threatening. The authoritarian doesn't have to invent much here. Like, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. But I actually think that the reason the narcissist who has been given too much power doesn't like academics is different from the reason that their base doesn't like academics. Because the authoritarian doesn't feel like they're being belittled by, like, the ideological threats, I think that they are belittled by the fact that if they are in the room with these people, they look dumb. And I think that's like the worst nightmare of the powerful narcissist, is to be shown to be a fake. And that aligns really well with the instinct of their base to see academia as part of the other, as like the elites who are not true Americans. And I think the authoritarian senses the discomfort that his base has with these ideas and sees an easy path to increase his popularity by attacking a group of people who he likely already resents, because powerful narcissists always believe that they are the best possible source of truth and thus are made very uncomfortable by people who know more than them. So whether it's instinctual or part of the playbook, the incentive to do this is very clear. It works because it's a 3-for-1. Every attack on universities weakens an independent source of truth and wins points with people who already resent them, while satisfying the need of the powerful narcissist to never feel like a dummy. But this doesn't mean that it will work or that it is very easy to have happen in the US. So there's reasons why America is potentially particularly resistant to this. One, the American university system is unusually decentralized. We don't have a central ministry. You can't just like flip a switch nationally. Now, the federal government does control a lot of the money that goes out to universities, so that is a lever that the powerful narcissist can access, but it is just one lever. Other countries have more top-down authority there. Second, universities tend to be very deeply embedded in local economies, so even voters who are suspicious of elites or of elite institutions, like Harvard or like the Ivy League generally, they're probably still going to support their local university that they know that like has the sports team that they like, that their neighbors work for and drives their town's prosperity. And this reality is apparent in the way that Trump is attacking universities with like quiet, boring ways ways to soften all of them. The loud, splashy ways are all focused on very large, prestigious coastal universities. Another reason U.S. higher ed is funded in a lot of different ways. Additionally, at least for the moment, a lot of American citizens have been through higher education and have had positive experiences there. Those alumni networks, those donor bases, that can outlast a lot of political pressure and also make it so that the political pressure is not as beneficial to the authoritarian in question. Also, and this comes down to individual cases, but the legal system, it means that not all of these things are actually legal for the president to do. For example, the 15% cap on overhead costs, that has not held up in court and right now does not exist anymore. So here's where I've arrived. There are some pretty clear reasons to do this, but I think also there are some pretty clear reasons why the US would be more resilient to it. And I think that we are seeing that in how it's playing out right now, but it's a long game, and how much we care matters. American universities, American research, very powerful, very important, huge amount of good done by it. I think a person taking my money, the taxpayers' money, and using it as a way to force other institutions to act the way he wants them to, deeply un-American. I think that we should recognize that, and I think that we should find it to be unacceptable. John, I'll see you on Tuesday.